The headlines following the collapse of FTX and Alameda Research have been turning heads for months, but there's one very important story that seems to have been memory-holed by the media. This is the revelation that FTX had invested in a small US bank with peculiar connections to Tether. Now, this is significant because, as I've said many times before, Alameda was the largest recipient of all the USDT ever minted by Tether. So today, I'm going to summarize one of the craziest articles so far about FTX and Alameda Research and tell you why it suggests that SBF was secretly doing the bidding of some truly powerful people. Oh, hey, so, look, I just want to say, I know a lot of people have, a lot of questions right now about what happened. And, look, my main motivation in all of this was totally focused on being able to make, enough money to be able to devote eventually all of my time to playing League of Legends. That has been my goal all along. To reach that challenger level and become, the LOL player I was always meant to be. So, to the best of my knowledge, any illegal activity that may have taken place at FTX was, not my fault. Because, when you've taken a cocktail of Adderall and quinoa and played 18 straight hours to improve your MMR, then that doesn't, make for the optimal conditions to oversee a multi-billion-dollar business. So my focus was definitely not where it should have been. So it is quite possible that other parties at FTX were able to buy a bank in the middle of nowhere without my knowledge. Yeah. Anyway, look, I'd love to be able to say more right now, but I have to go and do a Twitter Spaces, and then I'm appearing on several podcasts later too. So I hope that makes everything clear. And when I get out of here in 100 years' time, my sole focus then will be to make sure that FTX customers are made whole. Yeah. The article I'll be summarizing today was published by Unlimited Hangout, an independent media outlet that was founded by journalist Whitney Webb in January 2020. Whitney is famous for writing a 2-volume book titled One Nation Under Blackmail, published in 2022, which recently became a bestseller. The book is about the network of corporations, intelligence agencies, criminal groups, governments, global organizations, and politicians that gave rise to Jeffrey Epstein. The TLDR is that US intelligence merged with organized crime groups in the 1940s and has been trying to take over the world ever since. Now, this sounds insane until you read the book. Everything is meticulously cited and sourced, and Whitney has repeatedly challenged anyone to provide evidence to contradict her claims. Now, given Whitney's interest in folks like Epstein, you might be wondering why she's currently investigating what really happened with FTX and Alameda. Well, the short answer is that Whitney believes that FTX and Alameda may be a part of the financial apparatus that Epstein was allegedly operating. For context, Whitney's book makes the case that Epstein was a master money launderer. His purpose was not only to blackmail powerful people by having them engage in disgusting activities, but also to make their dirty money clean and potentially even provide outside funding to intelligence agencies. As most of you will know, Epstein was arrested in early July 2019, less than 2 months after Sam Bankman-Fried founded FTX. As most of you will also know, Epstein was found dead in his prison cell in early August 2019. The verdict was suicide, and, well, let's just say that plenty of people don't believe that for 1 second. This left a money laundering position open that FTX and Alameda were perfectly positioned to fill. If you've been keeping up with our coverage of FTX and Alameda, you'll know that there was basically zero record keeping. There are tens of billions of dollars unaccounted for, and the top creditors are unknown. It really does look like the aftermath of a very elaborate money laundering operation. Now, to be fair, this could be nothing more than a coincidence. It could also be a coincidence that Sam and his family have close connections to the exact same politicians that Epstein was involved with. What's harder to explain, however, is that Sam hired the same legal team as Ghislaine Maxwell last December. For those unfamiliar, Maxwell was Epstein's partner in crime, and she was sentenced to 20 years in prison for helping him do things I dare not repeat here on YouTube. She now sits in a minimum security prison in Florida, which offers vegan food and allows inmates to play sport. Now, from what I can tell, Whitney's alarm bells went off when she heard that Sam had hired the same legal team as Maxwell. 2 days later, she published an article titled, quote, FTX and the Curious History of Farmington State Bank, which was co-authored by another amazing journalist named Ed Berger. To give you a taste, the introduction to the article states, quote, the Farmington State Bank, since at least 1995, has had ties to some of the most covert and criminal offshore financial networks of the modern era, with connections to intelligence-linked financial fraudsters of considerable notoriety. I'll leave a link to the full article in the description, and I'll reiterate that it's easily the craziest article I've read so far about the FTX and Alameda situation. Now, the first part of the article provides a bit of history about the bank in question. The Farmington State Bank is a fully regulated bank located in rural Washington state. It was founded way back in 1887, and for most of its history, it only held a few $1 million in customer funds. However, in 1995, the bank was suddenly acquired by Archie Chan, a Brit living in Hong Kong. Archie acquired Farmington using a shell company in the Caribbean. The man who helped him set up the acquisition was the former chairman of the Federal Reserve Branch, which oversees Farmington. Buckle up, this is just the beginning. Now, although Farmington was owned by a shell company in the Caribbean, its offices were in Hong Kong. The office building belonged to one of the largest trading companies in Asia that was known for trading opium during the colonial period. Now, for reference, the UK basically owned much of Asia once upon a time. Archie's ancestry has its roots in the early colonial powers of Hong Kong, which, along with the location of the office, suggests a connection between Archie and this trading company. Archie was also the top executive of Glorious Sun, an SEC-regulated company which owns real estate around the world. Glorious Sun was founded in the 1960s by a Chinese man named Charles Yung and his brother. What's wild is that Charles was actually involved with the handover of Hong Kong from Britain to China in 1997. Not surprisingly, Charles has close connections to the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP. Also not surprisingly, Charles has a presence in Hong Kong as well as Macau, another supposedly autonomous Chinese region that's known for gambling and money laundering. Oddly enough, a Macau bank called Seng Heng, that was allegedly involved in this money laundering, was sold to US politicians. What's even more odd is that Seng Heng was eventually sold to the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, or ICBC. The ICBC appointed Charles to Seng Heng's board of directors. Note that the ICBC is the largest bank in the world by assets under management, with over $5.5 trillion of assets. Then there's Charles's brother, who was allegedly laundering money in the Philippines with Gloria's son, which you'll recall had Archie as its top executive. Gloria's son was later accused of stealing wealth from Filipinos with the help of the Filipino president, who was closely allied with the US. The Filipino president in question was Ferdinand Marcos, who seems to have helped the United States finance entities in China who were opposed to the CCP using Gloria's son and other enterprises. Lo and behold, Marcos was buying weapons from a man who worked closely with Epstein to launder money. So, to quickly recap, Archie buys Farmington. Archie serves as the top executive of Gloria's Son, an SEC-regulated company which appears to be heavily involved in money laundering in the Philippines for the purposes of propping up pro-US entities in China, something also being facilitated by Epstein. And here's another fact to add to the pile. Archie was given a royal order by the Kingdom of Poland in 2009. This was thanks to a sponsorship by another powerful fellow who has holding companies in the same place as the holding company for Farmington in the British Virgin Islands. The shady fellow in question is Paul Chan, whose company works closely with the Chinese military. Ironically, Paul was eventually recognized for his humanitarian service by the late Queen Elizabeth. Paul now operates multiple companies in China with the help of the Chinese military. Now, in the second part of the article, the authors expand on Farmington's connections to FTX and Alameda. They start by correcting the reporting by Protos that claimed Archie hadn't done much with the bank since 1995. Clearly, there seems to be some evidence of shady activity given his connections. Then they reveal that Farmington was sold to a company called FHB Corporation in 2020. FHB was founded in 2019, and its chairman is Jean Chalopin. Jean subsequently joined Farmington's board of directors, and the authors note it's not entirely clear why he purchased the bank. In any case, Jean also happens to be the chairman of Deltec Bank and Trust, a bank based in the Bahamas, which initially held the reserves backing Tether's USDT. Deltec was also the main bank for Alameda Research, which was, of course, based in the Bahamas. Now, as you might have guessed, Deltec has close connections to Epstein, but the authors direct the reader to purchase Whitney's book for the details. Well played. Here's where the connections become concerning. One of the directors of FHB is Noah Perlman, who was the chief compliance officer of Gemini when FHB was founded and is now Gemini's chief operating officer. In case you missed the memo, Gemini was hit hard by FTX's collapse via Genesis Trading. It just so happens that Noah was reportedly the person who pushed Gemini to partner with Genesis for its Gemini Earn product. Genesis closed its doors when FTX collapsed due to its exposure to the exchange, which resulted in Gemini Earn having to do the same. Anyways, following FHB's acquisition of Farmington, the bank pivoted to providing cryptocurrency and international payment services. This was facilitated by Farmington officially becoming part of the Federal Reserve System in June 2021. Last March, Farmington rebranded to Moonstone. 4 days later, FTX invested $11.5 million into the bank via Alameda Research. As reported by Cointelegraph, Alameda's investment was more than double what the bank was actually worth. Note that Farmington only had 3 employees. Shortly after that, Ronald Oliveira, the CEO of Revolut's US operations, became the CEO of Moonstone. What's strange is that Ronald resigned as CEO of Moonstone in August, just a few months after he took the position. Now, for those unfamiliar, Revolut is an online bank that's popular in the UK and the EU. Revolut was created by NJF Capital in 2015, and the authors reveal that the founder of NJF Capital, Nicole Junkerman, was a, quote, close and intimate associate of Epstein. The authors state that it's unclear whether the Epstein connection is why Ronald was appointed as CEO of Moonstone, but argue that it's likely. This is because of Tether, whose co-founder Brock Pierce has apparently bragged about his connections to Epstein. Recall that Deltek was Tether's main bank too. What's funny is that the authors initially allege that Tether is a Ponzi scheme, but then seem to backtrack on the allegation by pointing out that Tether was able to process over $10 billion of withdrawals after the collapse of Terra's UST not-so stablecoin. On that note, the authors highlight the fact that FTX, Alameda, and Genesis are currently under investigation for crashing UST. Now, this is something I've speculated on for quite some time. Consider that UST was quickly becoming a competitor to top stablecoins like USDT and USDC, or at least it seemed to be. More about what happened to Terra in the description. Now, the authors then go on to underscore something that was revealed as part of FTX and Alameda's bankruptcy process, and that's that the two companies had a total of 17 accounts at Deltek. Most of these accounts belonged to Alameda and contained large denominations of non-USD fiat currencies. Again, if you've been keeping up with our coverage of FTX and Alameda, you'll know that Sam was technically in total control of Alameda, despite him saying otherwise. This begs the question of what exactly Sam was doing at Deltek, and Moonstone's balance sheets seem to suggest an answer. As I mentioned earlier, Moonstone, aka Farmington, never had more than a few $1 million in customer deposits. This all changed in the third quarter of 2022. When the bank's deposits exploded from $10 million to over $80 million, $70 million of which went into just 4 accounts. The authors applaud Protos for pointing out the obvious. Quote, "It remains unclear how a Bahamas-based company like FTX, with ongoing investigations by top financial watchdogs, was able to purchase a stake in a federally approved bank." Remember that FTX had invested in Moonstone through Alameda. The authors also tip their caps to the New York Times, which said, quote, "The fact that an offshore hedge fund that was basically a crypto firm was buying a stake in a tiny bank for multiples of its stated book value should have raised massive red flags for the FDIC, state regulators, and the Federal Reserve. It's just astonishing that all of this got approved." Now, this ties into the third part of the article, which covers a suspicious partnership between Moonstone and a crypto company called Fluent Finance shortly before FTX collapsed. It turns out that Oliver Gale, one of the co-founders of Fluent Finance, invented central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, or so he says. What's interesting is that Oliver has reportedly had significant influence on the CBDC policy papers of central banks around the world. What's even more interesting is that Oliver believes that CBDCs should operate on public smart contract cryptocurrencies, not private and permissioned blockchains. Naturally, the purpose of Fluent Finance is to, quote, "accelerate crypto adoption by issuing a US plus stablecoin." What's scary is that this US plus stablecoin is described by the company as being a de facto CBDC, given that it will have, quote, "built-in digital identity standards." Now, this is eye-opening for 2 reasons. First, the World Economic Forum and others have actively discussed, if not outright promoted, a so-called synthetic CBDC, where the assets backing the stablecoin are held directly by the central bank. You'll know this if you watched our video about the WEF's crypto report. Second, and more importantly, Sam Bankman-Fried had said that FTX was planning on launching its stablecoin in the not-so-distant future. Sam said this at the end of October, around the same time Moonstone partnered with Fluent Finance and shortly before FTX collapsed. This is why I can't help but wonder whether this is why the powers that be decided to take down FTX and Alameda Research. In case you haven't noticed, competition between stablecoin companies has been extremely intense, and it wouldn't surprise me if Circle is the last stablecoin issuer standing. More about why that is using the link in the description. I digress. As for the authors at Unlimited Hangout, they speculate that, quote, if Tether is set to unravel in the wake of FTX's collapse, then US Plus seems designed to be the trustworthy counterpart meant to herd the legacy financial system into the CBDC era, where central banks will have total control. One thing is for sure, and that's that, quote, the connections revealed by pulling on the single thread of FTX's relationship with Farmington State Bank reveal that the corrupt actors and entities in this story extend far beyond bankman-fried and FTX. I couldn't have put it better myself. So this brings me to the big question, and that's whether Sam was secretly doing the bidding of some very powerful people. While the evidence discussed in the Unlimited Hangout article is mostly circumstantial, it's hard to ignore what you see when you put the facts side by side like this. To be honest, I don't have much to say about the Farmington side of the story. I reckon every single financial intermediary has been involved in some degree of illicit activity. This means that these financial intermediaries can never be trusted, and that's why cryptocurrencies exist. This is something that seems to have been forgotten on the FTX and Alameda side of the story. Both companies were ultimately intermediaries, and this left them open to the same corruption as institutions in the traditional financial system. What makes FTX and Alameda different from the other crypto exchanges is that Sam and his family had uncomfortably close connections with some of the most powerful people on the planet. If you watched our video about the FTX testimony, you'll know that Sam's parents were very involved in his work too. The fact that they are not facing nearly the same degree of scrutiny is evidence to me that there are some very powerful interests at play here. Never mind all the stuff about the top creditors having their identities concealed, as well as the identities of the people who put up the collateral for Sam's bond. Speaking of which, I don't buy the idea that Sam was dumb and didn't know what he was doing. He clearly did know what he was doing, and I'm confident this will be proven in court. What I want to know is who was telling him to do what he was doing, because he doesn't strike me as a mastermind. This is something that was picked up by the authors at Unlimited Hangout too. In the introduction to the article, they speculate that there was someone above Sam at FTX and Alameda. This is because the names of the people who appointed FTX's new CEO and FTX's new law firm are reportedly unknown. This is even more circumstantial evidence to suggest that FTX and Alameda were part of a much larger operation. This operation could be financial, it could be political, heck, it could be both. This is simply because you can do anything with money, especially when you have access to black holes offshore. Of all the possible operations that FTX and Alameda were involved in, the one that seems most probable to me is the ongoing operation to either control or kill the crypto industry, something currently being spearheaded by central banks and other institutions in the traditional financial system. In retrospect, it's possible that FTX and Alameda were primarily created to collect sensitive information about the largest crypto companies and projects, such as Tether. The financial and political components probably came much later, consistent with Farmington's 2020 to 2022 timeline. USDT is the largest stablecoin, and Sam probably has lots of information that he's ready to reveal in return for a lighter sentence. Maybe he'll even walk free. If he does, I will take it as proof that collecting info was FTX and Alameda's primary purpose all along. Make no mistake, if these assumptions are even remotely correct, then we could be on the brink of a crypto crackdown unlike any other. The good news is that everything that's decentralized will survive. The bad news is that most cryptocurrencies are centralized and they won't stand a fighting chance. More about decentralization in the description. Trust me, folks, it's never been more important than it is now.